The flood had already spoken in the language of ruin when the ranger found the prints. Two sets, misaligned, overlapping like hesitant notes on soaked staves. The first, heavy crescents gouged deep in silt, slowing, stumbling, then steadying. The second, narrower, daggered, skipping along log spines and slabbed roots like a metronome for survival. The air still smelled of river iron and uprooted heartwood. Drift lines marked the high-water panic. Reeds were slit open like veins. He measured distance with his breath, 8 strides between panic and decision. Something, or someone, changed cadence here. The storm clouds retreated in sallow tatters, letting a thin blade of sun etch the story across mud. He crouched. The small tracks vanished onto a snapped trunk, then reappeared beside the larger, closer now, almost biting. The ranger whispered to the ruined forest, not expecting an answer. Who taught whom to live? A tangle of debris had jammed against a broken footbridge. Torn bark, glassy branches, a child's blue ribbon, and fur, 2 kinds. Coarse, dark guard hairs matted with silt and pollen, and shorter, banded fibers, flexed like tiny springs. He sealed them in bags, not for forensics, for reverence. There were claw rakes along the beam, but not the wild syntax of fighting, more like punctuation marks for balance. Watermarks on the rails suggested a body leaned, rose, leaned again, building a rhythm against the current's cruel grammar. He traced a line where lighter paws had tapped ahead of heavier steps, scouting footholds invisible to panic. The wind carried a river-cool hush, as if the forest, newly baptized by catastrophe, wished to keep one secret for itself. Still, secrets leave shadows. In the mud below, 2 trails rejoined, then narrowed to one path that ran toward higher ground.
He replayed drone footage from the emergency over and over. Grainy shapes moved like ghosts behind curtains of rain, silhouettes swelling and shrinking with every lightning flash. The flood made light look tired, stretched thin across a city of water. A mass floated, fought, then anchored against a shifting raft of logs. Another figure flickered at the edges, low and deliberate, a spark riding the chaos. Frame by frame, the ranger advanced the story until the pixels seemed to breathe. There, a sudden change in the larger shape's posture, shoulders braced, head tilted as if listening to a language not meant for it. The smaller presence appeared again, a smudge leaping from trunk to trunk, then pausing, turning back, almost impatient. He muted the thrum of rotors and heard only thunder, and under that, a steadier beat, 2 heart tempos learning to match across a river that wanted everything. The forest did not expect witnesses when the first cold drops needled the canopy. The bear moved alone through a corridor of cedar and fog, shoulders rolling under a coat still thick from gentler seasons. Hunger rode its errands, habit drew its map. Far off, the river murmured like a rumor nobody believed. The Bobcat occupied edges, fence of briars, lip of shale, a lattice of fallen limbs where birdsong pooled. Between them stretched the quiet treaties of territory, scent, distance, and the time of day. Then the wind changed. The air stiffened with the taste of stone and electricity. Leaves turned their paler faces up, warning in the only way leaves can. A deer bolted wrong, cross-current to safety. Somewhere, a hollow tree sighed, an old spine finally giving. Before names, only instinct. Before the story, pressure dropped, and every living thing braced.
The first surge did not announce itself as doom. It came as a fuller breath, a shoulder bump, a new appetite lapping at the banks. Stones disappeared. Roots found their toes tickled, then swallowed. The bear, road-worn by seasons, misread the tempo, pausing where it had always paused to drink. The river climbed another rung. Logs loosened their vows and drifted toward ceremony. The bobcat's whiskers translated turbulence nobody else could read. The world ahead turned into a moving puzzle with fatal pieces. Rain thickened into ropes. Visibility narrowed to a wet tunnel threaded by lightning needles. The forest's floor became rumor. Everything important was happening 3 inches above it, where choices balanced on bark, moss, and luck. The river decided to climb the forest, and the forest, stunned, dated the flood like an unwanted guest, while the sky, officiant and accomplice, blessed the union. They met at a choke point of fallen trees, where speed meant injury and patience meant drowning. The bear arrived with the gravity of size, chest heaving, eyes glassy with calculations that muscle cannot solve. The bobcat materialized like a thought sharpened by necessity, a flicker of tawny along the slick log lattice. No roar, no hiss, only a measured exchange of glances, a confirmation that neither owned the moment. The current tried to draft them into separate gravities. The bobcat tested a route, hopped, slipped, recovered. The bear watched, translating small courage into possible physics. When the cat vanished behind a tumbling root ball, the bear lunged wrong. The river answered with a brutal tug, and a log slammed its flank. A pause. Then the cat reappeared, tail low, ears back, eyes a compass needle. Not friendship, coordination. A temporary ceasefire with extinction as negotiator.
The bobcat became a metronome on the slick cathedral of driftwood, tapping safe points with precision born of narrow margins. Each leap was a syllable in a sentence the bear could read only by doing. The bear learned the slow miracle of transferring weight without inviting the river's theft. It placed a paw where the smaller creature had pressed, feeling the give beneath claws, the shiver that meant stay low, and the groan that meant move now. The current tested their grammar with debris, an orphan door, a saw blade of bark, a root crown gnashing. The bobcat pivoted, waited, signaled with stillness. Stillness, not speed, meant survival on this moving floor. The bear's breath synced to the lesson, shorter, steadier. Their paths threaded and unthreaded, 2 melodies refusing dissonance. Somewhere upstream, a thunderhead cracked like a judge's gavel. Downstream, a bridge started to let go. Choice is a myth inside a flood. The river picked a new channel through the forest and tried to take them with it. The log lattice tilted, became a slide, then a trap. The bear slipped chest deep, claws screaming a sound wood understood. The bobcat vanished into spray, reappeared further downslope, spine coiled, searching for geometry in madness. It found a diagonal, shallow not by depth, but by resistance. Angled against the main thrust, a seam where debris slowed long enough to be useful. It looked back, held the bear with its stare, then stepped into that seam like a letter opening an envelope. The bear followed the stare, not the water. Wait became question mark, then answer. Their corridor narrowed between snapping branches, the air filled with seed husks, pollen froth, and the metallic scent of torn earth. The river kept choosing. They kept refusing.
High ground is a rumor during the storm, but rumors save lives. They found a knuckled rise of rock where the current split, one branch muttering, the other intent on murder. The bobcat arrived first, shoulders trembling from micro-corrections we never see. The bear arrived like a landslide, finally arrested. For a breath, the world reduced to chest movements, steam rising from wet coats, a chorus of distant collapses tallying losses in the forest's ledger. Lightning stitched horizon to horizon, revealing a drowned meadow where mice once printed comedies. The bear tested the stone's honesty. It held. The bobcat scanned the ruined geometry below, mapping routes for futures that did not yet exist. Their eyes met in a contract sealed without language. Another push, not yet. Wait for the water to argue with itself and tire. Above them, a branch surrendered, applauding gravity. Back in the present, the ranger compared the broken branch angles to rainfall records and discharge charts, converting chaos into dates and hours. He marked a map with red pins where guidance must have happened. Here, a long scratch where heavy claws tried. There, a neat pair of prints where light paws tested. His colleagues called it projection, kindness dressed as data. But there was the footage, and there were the hairs, two species braided by circumstance. He replayed audio from a night cam, nothing but rain and once a bass exhale, followed by a smaller, sharper breath. Not fear, accounting. He pinned an eighth location, an impossible traverse across a downed trunk polished by water. Impossible until you imagine the smaller body going first, showing balance under lightning's metronome. Evidence became story not by wish, but by the stubborn alignment of signs that refused coincidence.
When the waters dipped from fury to fury's echo, the forest still punished hunger. Berries had been sanded from their stems, insects relocated, fish lodged in grass where they glittered without moving. The bear needed calories or sleep would arrive as a velvet coffin. The bobcat's world was measured in mouse breaths and bird blinks. Now even silence had been washed thin. They moved along the scarred edges where debris snagged and sometimes life collected. The bobcat found a tangle heavy with scent. Eggs, damp straw, something wounded. It stopped, gauged the bear's distance, then retreated, claiming nothing. The bear, reading the permission, waded in and fed the engine enough to keep tomorrow possible. The cat drank from a puddle the color of tea and sat guard, eyes cutting the reeds. Cooperation is not charity. It is gravity temporarily inverted by need and intelligence. By sunrise, the storm's tantrum had faded to a hoarse apology. Mist laid gauze over the forest's open wounds. On a spit of braided sand and shattered bark, the ranger found what he didn't know he needed. Parallel tracks drawing closer, then overlapping, then separating again like a heartbeat recovering its rhythm. He pressed two fingers into the bear's print, felt the cold hold him, as if the ground remembered the weight. He placed a knuckle beside the bobcat's mark and imagined the pause before each leap, the calculations a small life must master to steer a giant. A kingfisher strafed the river, taking attendance of survivors. Somewhere, something chirred with unreasonable hope. The ranger folded the map. This wasn't a miracle. It was a practice. And practices, once learned, are how stories agree to become legacies. By the third day after the flood, sound itself seemed shy. No birds rehearsed their morning routines. Even the wind stepped softly. The ranger's boots found silt where moss used to bloom, each step whispering like an apology. Tree bark bore tattoos of silt and leaf shadow, and between them faint claw marks, vertical, deliberate, communication disguised as panic. He knelt, tracing parallel grooves up the trunk, ending where the bark was stripped smooth. Something had climbed, heavy but desperate. He pictured the bear dragging itself above the chaos, the bobcat already waiting, tail flicking like a ticking fuse. The forest had archived their choices in silence, a library no one else could read. Overhead, a crow finally broke the vow, one note raw enough to sound like grief. He looked up. Grief always comes late when nature keeps its own eulogy schedule. At the storm's peak, they found what passed for heaven, an island of oak limbs fused by pressure and debris, high enough that air felt dry for the first time in hours. The bear hauled itself onto the throne of ruin, trembling under the weight of survival. The bobcat paced along the perimeter, eyes translating distance into safety codes. The river below was now an illuminated artery of the planet, glowing with silt and stray fireflies. Lightning froze them into a sculpture of contrast, muscle and precision,
fear, and calculation. From above, they looked like two fragments of myth misfiled in the same story. The oak creaked, adjusting its theology to accommodate pilgrims. The cat lay down, body a tight coil of exhaustion, while the bear leaned against a trunk, still humming with storm memory. For a moment, both believed the flood had grown tired of them. Back at the ranger's office, the maps failed to keep their promises. Blue lines pretended to contain rivers, brown contours claimed authority over elevation, but reality had rewritten itself. He spread aerial photos on the desk, overlapping the lines where prints had been found. The patterns resisted logic, yet obeyed rhythm. One route curved, doubled back, then vanished exactly where floodwater should have erased all trace. That persistence was language. Animals didn't need ink. They wrote with decision. He penciled an arc connecting the final sightings, the line crossing 3 improbable rises. "Why climb there?" he muttered. The answer came unsummoned. Because something smaller knew it would hold. He stopped writing, the hair on his forearms prickling. The forest wasn't random. It was annotated by instinct, footnotes written in mud. And those footnotes were teaching him humility, one impossible trajectory at a time. As waters receded, scarcity sharpened both senses and ethics. The bear scavenged for anything edible, half-buried fish, carrion, soft wood still tasting of life. The bobcat kept its distance, yet never vanished, shadowing each attempt with predator patience but no malice. Once, the bear tore open a hollow log and revealed larvae pulsing like wet pearls. It stepped aside, gesturing in a slow nod of weariness. The bobcat advanced, ate precisely, then retreated, leaving enough to matter. Cooperation was an uneasy math. Share enough to survive, not enough to depend. But dependence was forming anyway, silent and unplanned. Hunger teaches economy, not greed. The flood had reset the rules, forced equations where rivalry once ruled. Together, they learned that survival is not dominance, it's rhythm. They rested that night under a scaffold of washed roots, stomachs quiet, breaths syncing with the retreating heartbeat of the storm.
The sun returned like a stranger rehearsing kindness. It pierced through branches stripped to anatomy, spreading amber across slick stones. The bear's flank carried a bruise the size of memory, purple, gold, and rust. The bobcat approached, cautious, its pupils narrowing to surgical slits. It sniffed the wound, hissed softly, and licked at the torn fur once, twice, a doctor working against superstition. The bear didn't punch. Exhaustion had rewritten pain thresholds. Around them, flies resumed their commerce. Mist swirled with the scent of iron and moss. The light didn't heal, but it revealed. It painted their shadows side by side, one broad and monumental, the other small but assertive, both elongated toward the same horizon. The flood had retreated, but something else had risen, an alignment no storm could wash away. The forest, for the first time in days, exhaled without trembling. When the ranger hiked upriver, he noticed how destruction organizes itself into art. Logs braided into spirals, roots reaching skyward like prayers denied but not forgotten. On a flat stone, he saw scratches forming a crescent and a crossbar, too deliberate for accident. He took a photo, marking coordinates. If read as symbols, the grooves might mean direction. If read as accident, they meant nothing. But meaning was insistent. The marks aligned with the last recorded footage spot, where shapes once struggled in silhouette. He knelt, thumb tracing ridges until splinters whispered against his skin. "Who writes like this?" he asked, as thunder rolled distantly like laughter.
Nature answers through timing, never words. A gust bent the reeds downstream, pointing exactly where the next clue waited. He followed, notebook damp, realizing he wasn't cataloging evidence anymore. He was walking through someone else's survival memoir.
Sleep became the most dangerous predator. The bear's legs trembled under invisible weight. Each step was a wager between progress and collapse. The bobcat scouted ahead but turned often, ensuring the giant's silhouette still moved. Once, the bear sat midstream, refusing motion. The current tugged, pleading surrender. The cat yowled, high and sharp, cutting through wind. It leapt onto a half-sunken log and waited, defiant as punctuation in chaos. The bear watched, exhaled steam, and rose again, dragging exhaustion like armor. Fatigue is where instinct meets choice, and choice is where stories diverge. Together they crossed shallows littered with glassy foam and seeds that looked like stars. When they reached the far bank, the cat didn't wait this time. It circled twice, curled near the bear's paw, and slept. Above them, the sky turned metallic gray, spent but not empty. At the research station, the ranger uploaded data that refused domestication. The print's distances implied intention. The claw spacing implied caution. Nothing aligned with known predator-prey logic. His superior advised simplification. Coincidence sells better than miracles. He nodded, pretending to agree, but the photos burned through reason. On one image, a single paw print overlapped another so perfectly, it blurred identity. Which creature followed which? The ranger zoomed until pixels broke apart into color dust. Somewhere between brown and gold lay a truth unfit for spreadsheets. He turned off the monitor and listened, to rain guttering outside, to the forest reassembling itself in darkness. Sometimes science ends where story begins. He wrote a note to himself. Perhaps empathy is a field unmeasured because it refuses control. Then he drew two circles touching edges, no equations, just orbit.
Night returned soft, but untrustworthy. Fireflies blinked above rot, their choreography ignoring tragedy's schedule. The bear slept heavy, lungs sounding like distant surf. The bobcat woke first, ears twitching at each spark in the dark. It moved closer to the bear's side, drawn by residual warmth. A frog croaked from a newly carved pond that had swallowed an entire meadow, echoes layered like dreams. The world smelled of renewal wrapped in decay. The bobcat blinked slowly, a predator's version of prayer. In the distance, lightning flickered one last farewell, tracing the ghost of the storm across bruised clouds. For the first time since chaos began, the cat allowed itself to rest without calculation. Tomorrow would invent new rules, but tonight, the floodwaters, for all their cruelty, had built something neither strength nor fear alone could manage. Trust, resting lightly against a heartbeat bigger than its own. Weeks later, a trail cam sent a corrupted file to the ranger's inbox. Timestamp unreadable, coordinates skewed. He almost deleted it until curiosity refused politeness. The image was grainy, half washed in fog, but clear enough. A bear standing in a shallowed stream, head lowered. On its shoulder, unmistakable, a smaller silhouette perched, a bobcat, tail flicked like punctuation. Impossible balance, improbable peace. The ranger checked metadata. No edits, no tampering. He printed it, pinned it beside satellite maps. Colleagues called it glitch art, pixel ghosts. He called it proof, not of myth, but of behavior science hadn't caught up to yet. Every frame before and after showed only trees, as if the forest itself erased evidence once the story was told. He smiled. Maybe compassion doesn't want to be recorded. It wants to be remembered by those who still listen. Spring came reluctant but determined. Shoots erupted through silt beds like fragile rebellions. Insects returned first, then birds rehearsed hesitant arias from skeleton branches. The ranger hiked the old path again, where once he found footprints merging. New prints marked the same route, lighter, spaced farther apart. A bear's maybe, or maybe several seasons of children learning from echo. On a sunlit boulder, fresh claw marks etched parallel grooves, practice, repetition, habit. Nature has its own continuity plan. Downriver, bobcat tracks danced near reeds, suggesting descendants or the same survivor refusing retirement. The air no longer smelled of iron, but of damp clay and green ambition. He stood in the middle of the trail, the wind combing through his jacket like an approving hand. Healing, he thought, isn't erasure. It's the elegant overlap of what endures with what dares to begin again. At sunset, reflections told more truth than shadows. The ranger watched as ripples rewrote color into memory. On one side, the forest shimmered in bronze forgiveness. On the other, a void where currents still dragged debris. He noticed faint distortions, a swirl like fur brushed upstream. Imagination or echo? Hard to tell when nature keeps blurring her miracles. He dropped a twig. It spun, caught, then settled in an eddy shaped suspiciously like two prints, side by side. Legacy, he realized, isn't built on witness, but on pattern. If two beings once refused nature's hostility and walked away, the river would keep repeating that geometry forever. He whispered to the water, "Keep teaching." The surface answered with ripples that looked like agreement. Dusk folded the scene, storing light for another storm's lesson yet to come.
Years later, after new floods and new rescues, locals spoke of animals moving together during storms. Bears choosing ridges bobcats once favored, smaller cats following river paths that bore faint giant prints. Myths grow where evidence sleeps. The ranger, now gray at the temples, listened without correction. Stories, like rivers, are truer in motion than in fact. He walked one last time to the same rise where silence once hummed with survival. Moss had softened the scars, yet under sunlight the shapes remained. He laid his hand over the stone and felt warmth travel backward in time. Somewhere beneath roots in memory, the rhythm continued, an old agreement renewed with every heartbeat that refuses isolation. The story doesn't end, it replays, quieter, wiser. And each retelling is the flood remembering compassion, whispering through the forest's pulse. Even predators can learn the language of mercy. Rain returned weeks later, softer, almost ceremonial. The ranger stood where the flood once roared, watching water trickle through grooves carved by catastrophe. The soil retained memory like scar tissue, each depression whispering stories in mineral language. He pressed a palm into the earth. It pulsed faintly as if rehearsing the heartbeat of those who'd crossed it. Beneath his fingertips, he imagined layered history, a bobcat's precision, a bear's burden, both encoded in the geography of survival. Wind rustled reeds into applause, and a heron skimmed the water's mirrored skin. Every sound felt rehearsed by ghosts. He collected a soil sample for analysis but labeled it differently, residual cooperation, sample A. Science would call it sediment, but he preferred something else, evidence of empathy. As twilight descended, droplets patterned the surface, blurring his reflection until it resembled two faces, merging into one enduring silence that no flood could erase.
Survival doesn't end when danger fades. It changes shape. The bear's wound festered, its limp deepening. The bobcat noticed first, the way its companion paused mid-step, breath shallow and uneven. Predators aren't nurses, yet instinct is a flexible architect. The cat circled, sniffed, then vanished briefly into the foliage, returning with something dead but fresh, a fish caught in a receding puddle. It dragged the prize within reach, dropped it without ceremony, and watched from a respectful distance. The bear, after suspicion, ate slowly, blood painting its muzzle like war paint. Between bites, it grunted, perhaps gratitude, perhaps exhaustion. The bobcat blinked, tail twitching rhythmically, then settled. Hunger had taught them balance before, now it taught compassion. Rain clouds murmured overhead, distant but listening. When the bear slept, the cat stayed awake, guarding against scavengers, eyes reflecting each lightning flash as though memorizing how kindness looks when drenched in pain. In the ranger's cabin, the whiteboard overflowed with connections, pins, strings, photographs, timestamps. Each clue created more questions than answers. He'd stopped trying to explain. Instead, he sought meaning. Nature's equations were emotional, not mechanical. What if, he murmured to himself, the flood didn't destroy balance, it revealed it? He mapped the storm's pattern beside satellite data and found a peculiar rhythm, points where wind calmed just long enough for creatures to act intelligently. He imagined the bobcat calculating safety in chaos, the bear interpreting silence as signal. His pen hovered over the word communication before crossing it out, too human. He wrote instead, recognition. The notion lingered in the lamplight, daring him to believe that empathy might be older than language. He stepped outside. The forest breathed heavy but alive. Perhaps witness was not observation, it was participation, a quiet joining of the story's pulse.
The next storm came not as punishment, but as remembrance. Lightning stitched familiar lines across the same valley, tracing the path of vanished heroes. The bear and bobcat's legacy wasn't marked by graves, but by movement, echoed choices, repeated behaviors. Other animals seemed to follow invisible cues, migrating early, climbing higher. The sky, aware of its own guilt, softened thunder into lullabies. Rain fell straight this time, obedient, not sideways and furious. On a ridge overlooking the healed forest, the ranger stood, drenched again, waiting for proof that stories recycle. And there, amid the storm's quiet core, he spotted it, a small shadow threading through reeds, pausing beside a larger form half hidden by mist. Their silhouettes trembled, merged, then vanished into silver rain. Whether memory, vision, or miracle, he couldn't tell. But the lightning's timing was too perfect. Nature, once again, signing her confession across the clouds. That night, in the hushed interim between exhaustion and peace, the bear dreamed, not of food or territory, but of sound. A heartbeat, smaller than its own, guiding it through corridors of water. In the dream, the flood was still alive, but less cruel, its current warm and deliberate. The bobcat moved ahead, golden light woven through its fur, its eyes luminous compasses. The bear followed until river became mist, mist became wind, and the wind carried a rhythm, two lives measured in shared defiance. When the bear woke, the forest smelled of pine resin and rain's aftertaste. The bobcat was gone, hunting perhaps, or simply giving distance. But its paw prints surrounded the bear's resting place in a loose spiral, a boundary, a promise. The bear exhaled steam into the dawn. Dreams are not fiction to creatures who have already died and returned still breathing.
Weeks later, the ranger presented his findings at a regional conference. Charts flickered on screens, flood timelines, GPS traces, photographic anomalies. The room's air hummed with academic skepticism. Coincidence, someone muttered. Another scribbled anthropomorphism in the margins. He let them. Science requires disbelief as currency. But when he showed the photograph, the bear and bobcat together, the room fell into hush. For 5 seconds, reason and awe shared the same breath. "We record cooperation among species under duress," he said, voice steady, but rarely this prolonged. A hand rose. "What's your hypothesis?" He smiled, tired but sure, that intelligence is a spectrum, and empathy is its gravity. Silence again, uncomfortable, profound. Outside, rain pressed against glass like a reminder. He closed his laptop, feeling the forest inside his pulse. Some truths, he knew, can't be peer-reviewed. They must be lived, remembered, and sometimes believed against statistics. Days stretched into weeks, and then the bobcat was simply gone. The bear roamed alone, sniffing at hollow logs and riverbanks that no longer replied. Each scent faded under new growth, each sound rearranged by spring's enthusiasm. Loss doesn't echo in the wild, it absorbs. Still, the bear paused at every familiar crossing, nostrils flaring for traces of something unquantifiable. The air offered none. Nights lengthened, insects replaced thunder. It drank from clear pools and waited for the ripple of a smaller reflection beside its own, but only stars answered. Absence settled like silt, soft, inevitable. The bear's eyes dulled slightly, its step slowed. Yet even solitude carries inheritance, the way it checked current before crossing, the caution in its stride, less brute force, more calculation. The bobcat lived on in those gestures, invisible but permanent. Nature doesn't mourn, she revises behavior. That is her form of remembrance. Months after silence reclaimed the valley, the ranger found remnants lodged beneath driftwood. Small, delicate bones, clean but unmistakable, feline. He crouched, removing his hat, rain dimpling the puddle beside him. Around the remains, claw marks traced semicircles, massive ones. He touched the soil, impressions revealed the bear's prints lingering protectively. The story rearranged itself, loyalty not as metaphor, but fact. He bagged the bones gently, labeling them not with numbers, but a single word: teacher. For days afterward, he dreamed of the flood running backward, water restoring everything it once stole. Yet the dreams always ended the same: two silhouettes on high ground, one watching, one resting. He didn't share the find publicly. Some discoveries lose purity when spoken aloud. Instead, he buried the bones higher on the ridge, where sunrise first touched the forest, whispering, "Even endings deserve altitude." Years folded into routine. The bear aged, its coat graying around the muzzle, joints thickened by seasons of damp cold. Still, every autumn, it followed the same route along the river's scar, pausing at familiar boulders, sniffing the same air as if reading invisible scripture. Locals reported sightings of the Old Guardian, a giant who never harmed livestock, who sat near campsites like a relic guarding memory. One winter, tracks led to the ridge where snow sculpted silence. There, the bear lay down facing the sunrise, breathing shallow but steady. Around its resting place, the wind gathered leaves into spirals, marking the earth as if by ritual. By morning, snow had covered it, yet the outline remained visible, a monument shaped by weather, not stone. The forest didn't mourn, it adapted. Compassion had entered its ecosystem, spreading through behavior like pollen in spring.
Decades later, the ranger's journals outlived him. Pages yellowed, ink feathered, yet the narrative held. Children who found the journals read them as fables. Scientists annotated them as anomalies. Poets called them proof. But the forest itself remembered differently. In satellite images, researchers noticed strange migration paths forming geometric loops near the old floodplain, circuits of coexistence. No one traced them to two ghosts who once defied extinction together. The truth hid in plain persistence. On fog-heavy mornings, hikers swore they heard a bear's groan harmonizing with a bobcat's rasp somewhere upstream. Perhaps echoes, perhaps inheritance. Stories rarely end cleanly. They dissolve into ecosystems, into instincts,
into memory's bloodstream. What remains unwritten is often truer than what's told. The river still bends where two lives once intersected, carving empathy into geography. Every ripple repeats the same refrain. Survival is just another word for love. Morning fog carried an unfamiliar rhythm, like two heartbeats syncing across time. The ranger's successor, a young researcher named Mira, paused beside the old ridge. Her instruments registered low-frequency vibrations in the soil, pulsing irregularly, almost musical. She adjusted sensors, suspecting malfunction, yet when she turned them off, the pattern continued. Soft, deliberate, fading whenever she stepped back. The forest, she thought, was whispering in Morse code. She opened her notebook, jotting, not seismic, not mechanical, organic memory. A heron lifted from the riverbank, wings trailing droplets that glowed in angled sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rehearsed itself, low and polite. Mira closed her eyes, listening. Every creature carries its ancestors in the blood. Perhaps landscapes do too. The ridge trembled again, faint but sure. Not threat, heartbeat. She smiled, whispering to no one, "You're still here." The wind replied through cedar leaves, tender and ancient as forgiveness.
Inside the research hut, Mira cataloged audio samples of wind currents along the valley. Each file sounded different, yet one frequency repeated, a deep exhalation layered beneath birdsong and rainfall. Spectrogram analysis formed a pattern startlingly familiar. Two sine waves overlapping, diverging, reuniting. The visual looked like paw prints crossing in eternity. She replayed the sample slowed down. The low hum resembled breathing. Memory, she realized, might exist not in fossils, but in resonance. Nature, after all, doesn't bury her miracles. She broadcasts them subtly until someone decides to listen. She labeled the file coexistence_continuum.wav and leaned back, heart pounding in sync with the forest's secret metronome. Outside, the first raindrops began their slow applause, reminding her that water never truly leaves, it reincarnates as echo. The bear and bobcat had not vanished, they had converted into atmosphere, coded into frequencies, softer than grief and stronger than extinction. The next tempest arrived like déjà vu, cloud banks swelling over the scarred valley. But this time, rain fell evenly, riverbanks swelling only to humility. Mira hiked to the ridge with calibrated sensors, expecting chaos, finding choreography. Water threaded through old flood scars like veins remembering restraint. She thought of the story, two creatures forced into cooperation, and how weather might be capable of redemption too. Thunder rolled without rage, a baseline rather than a sentence. The forest seemed prepared, bending but never breaking, trees shifting to shelter younger growth. The ridge where bones once rested remained dry, as though nature had installed reverence into her own hydraulics. Mira wrote in her field log, "The ecosystem recalls its trauma, adapts accordingly." She lingered, drenched, waiting for the inevitable deluge that never came. The storm, wiser now, washed the forest gently, proof that even tempests can evolve into caretakers.
After rainfall ceased, Mira approached the reformed riverbanks and knelt beside rippling shallows. Silt patterns danced like calligraphy, curves and lines tracing complex shapes. She filmed the movement, later freezing frames until the pattern stabilized into what looked unmistakably like intertwined tracks. Nature's handwriting rewritten. Water carved lessons with repetition, its syntax borrowed from memory. As she watched, two leaves floated side by side, caught in an eddy, spinning endlessly without touching, yet never separating. "Partnership," she whispered. The river responded with a soft hiss as a wave kissed the stone near her boot. She realized grammar wasn't human property. It was an instinct shared by existence itself, where movement becomes meaning.
The water's cadence slowed. Its reflection revealed a shimmer of sunlight splitting into twin bands. She filmed until her camera battery died, knowing some stories aren't captured, they're inherited through vibration and unending motion. At dusk, the forest became theater. Mist rose like curtains, revealing silhouettes that flirted with reality. Mira adjusted her lens, scanning the opposite ridge. Between birch trunks, a large figure moved with deliberate weight, its outline too fluid for imagination. She froze, breath condensing into disbelief. Next, a smaller shape emerged beside it, slender, sharp-eared, unmistakably feline. Her pulse quickened. The figures lingered a moment longer, gazes seemingly locked on her before fading into shadow's embrace. She replayed the footage. Pixels wavered, unstable but persistent. The timestamp was exact, 23 years to the day since the Great Flood. Coincidence bends easily under wonder's pressure. She whispered, "You kept the appointment." Wind spiraled through the trees as if bowing to unseen actors exiting stage. Somewhere upstream, a branch cracked, soft applause from an audience made of rain, ghosts, and everything between. The next season brought cubs, both bear and bobcat, roaming the same corridors of the old floodplain. Trail cams captured strange footage, predators traveling near each other without conflict, sharing territory lines like shared sentences. Mira reviewed each clip, her throat tightening. Behavior change doesn't happen by accident. It's memory, reprogramming instinct. Evolution, perhaps, but guided by story. She theorized that survival patterns had imprinted across generations, teaching empathy through adaptation. Her colleagues debated, citing data insufficiency. Yet field evidence outweighed caution, harmony repeating itself. The forest had internalized cooperation as new law. Watching a bobcat mother lead her kittens past a lounging bear, Mira smiled through disbelief. "They remember," she said softly. Above, the clouds drifted like witnesses, neither approving nor denying, just continuing the long experiment called forgiveness. Beneath their shadow, the forest exhaled, balanced perfectly between history and hope. In her dreams, Mira saw the flood running backward, water retreating into clouds, trees reassembling from driftwood, animals drying mid-leap. Time inverted itself until everything froze at the moment before the first raindrop. There, at the center of this reverse chaos, stood the bear and the bobcat, still and waiting. When she reached them, neither spoke, yet both turned their gaze toward her, as if appointing her witness. The bear nodded once, the bobcat blinked in slow reverence. Then the world resumed its natural order, but gentler, slower, as if calibrated anew. She woke to rainfall tapping on the window, not violent, just rhythmic, like typing from the past. Dreams, she noted, are the language the forest uses when facts sleep. She wrote a single line in her log. Perhaps some floods must unmake time to rewrite mercy. Outside, dawn arrived soaked in gold forgiveness. Years later, the regional museum displayed Mira's findings: maps, photos, recordings, soil samples. In a glass case, small bones rested upon a bed of moss, labeled Specimen Unknown, evidence of adaptive cooperation. Visitors whispered reverently, children pressing palms against glass. A projector looped footage of the storm and the mysterious pair, blending science with mythology. Mira stood among them silently, feeling the weight of translation, how stories become artifacts, how wonder becomes display. A boy asked her, "Did it really happen?" She smiled gently. Everything real begins as impossible. The curator dimmed the lights. Thunder from archived audio filled the room, not menacing, just monumental. Outside, rain began again, drumming against the roof in the same rhythm that started it all. For a fleeting moment, she swore she saw paw prints forming on the fogged glass, two, side by side,
before dissolving back into condensation's quiet applause. Dusk painted the water copper. Mira stood by the same river that once devoured the world and now murmured lullabies. She dipped her fingers into the current, cool, deliberate, sentient. "You remember, don't you?" she whispered. The river shimmered, parting light into twin arcs, reflecting both bear and bobcat shadows faintly beneath the surface. Water carries memory molecularly. Each droplet had once touched them, once recorded breath, fur, motion. She sensed it, an ancient pact renewed with each rainfall. The current tugged at her sleeve, playful, reverent, urging witness. She pulled her hand free, droplets trailing like silver signatures. The forest around her sighed with old familiarity, cicadas reciting evening prayers. In that moment, she understood. The flood wasn't punishment, it was baptism. The river didn't destroy, it inducted life into empathy. Beneath the golden hush, two unseen souls swam eternal circuits, keeping the covenant alive.
Decades later, recordings surfaced of low-frequency murmurs beneath the valley. Scientists argued seismic noise, others claimed geological shifts. But when Mira, older now, listened, she recognized it instantly, the duet of survival. She sent the file to global researchers, titling it "The Valley Still Speaks." No one agreed on its source. Some called it natural resonance, others dismissed it as myth's residue. Mira didn't care for consensus. She returned once more to the ridge, sat where the ranger once knelt, and waited. Wind moved through trees, slow and articulate. Then she heard it again, two pulses, intertwined, ancient and patient. Her eyes filled. She whispered, "They're still teaching." Lightning arced on the horizon, tracing their memory across the sky. The earth rumbled softly beneath her feet, neither warning nor farewell, but acknowledgement. Some legacies don't fade. They harmonize with the planet until time itself begins to listen. Autumn bled quietly into the valley, staining the leaves amber and rust. Mira hiked through corridors of light where silence moved like a living animal. Her heart beat in tempo with the forest's slow respiration, the rhythmic creak of trunks, the hush of wind rehearsing an ancient song. Every sound had memory embedded in it. Beneath a fallen cedar, she found moss shaped like two half-moons, prints long softened but unmistakable. When she touched them, warmth radiated upward, faint but real, as though the earth exhaled gratitude. Somewhere behind her, a branch cracked. Deliberate, unhurried, familiar. She turned and saw only dust motes catching the sun. Still, she whispered, "I know you're here." The breeze replied with the scent of wet fur and rain. In that instant, she realized the forest itself had inherited their heartbeat, every root and ripple synchronized to a lesson carved in survival and grace.
Winter arrived stealthily, wrapping the valley in breath. Every sunrise exhaled fog that clung low to the ground, a language of steam whispering over the river's surface. Mira set her camera to record, but condensation blurred every frame. Visibility dissolved into poetry. Within the mist, shapes formed, suggestions of motion, hints of fur, then vanished before the lens could confirm. She stopped filming. Some testimonies resist documentation. They demand surrender. Standing ankle-deep in frost-stiff reeds, she listened to the river hum beneath ice crust. The tone rose and fell like recitation, two notes in minor harmony. The world, she thought, is fluent in loss, yet stubborn in memory. Steam coiled around her wrist, tightening briefly like a handshake, then disappeared. She smiled through shivering breath. "I hear you," she said. Somewhere beneath the ice, a current quickened, as if acknowledgement were fuel powerful enough to stir eternity. Sleep no longer offered rest. It became an archive. Each night, Mira entered the flood again, only this time she wasn't watching. She was inside it. The bear's eyes found hers, reflecting galaxies of mud-brown light. The Bobcat circled, tail slicing water in precise arcs. They moved through the dream like teachers grading silence. "What should I record?" she asked, though no sound left her mouth. The Bobcat leapt toward her, landing inches away, pressing its forehead against her knee. A benediction. The bear exhaled a gust that tasted like thunder but felt like peace. She woke with her heart drumming against ribs, damp palms smelling faintly of river clay. On her bedside table, droplets had gathered beside her journal, though no window was open. She wrote without hesitation. "They visit to remind me memory isn't linear, it flows." The ink refused to dry, shimmering like water under moonlight.
Spring broke open with sudden gentleness. The first thunderstorm came as invitation, not invasion. Mira trekked to the ridge, carrying nothing but her notebook and a vial of soil from the museum display. Rain began mid-step, deliberate, ceremonial. She poured the soil into the river, watching it swirl into dissolution, particles rejoining their origin. "Your story is home again," she whispered. Lightning flashed, not sharp, but curved, like a smile across the horizon. The wind shifted direction twice, circling her as if drawing a boundary. For a heartbeat, the air thickened with shapes, massive, feline, fleeting. She closed her eyes, not to imagine but to remember. The ground thrummed beneath her boots. The forest bowed, the river stilled. Then everything exhaled at once, a collective sigh of release. When the rain ceased, sunlight broke through like applause. Nature had completed her eulogy and rewritten it as a beginning. Mira's final report wasn't addressed to any institution. It began simply, "To whoever listens after I'm gone." The document wasn't filled with data, but confession, how science led her to faith, how faith redirected her toward evidence more intricate than numbers. She wrote of empathy as ecosystem, of storms as editors, of two lives that altered evolution's grammar. Each page pulsed with reverence, each paragraph a tributary returning to source. When she finished, she left the file on a solar-powered recorder buried near the ridge, knowing the valley would decide what to keep. As dusk descended, the sky darkened to deep indigo. Thunder murmured like punctuation. She whispered, "Carry this." The wind lifted, obedient, scattering leaves shaped like commas. Somewhere below, the river answered with its eternal refrain, 2 beats, perfectly synced. The chronicle ended there, but the story, uncooperative as weather, continued writing itself in everything that breathed.
The recorder survived a decade of storms before hikers found it lodged between roots, its casing moss-soft and half-swallowed by earth. When they pressed play, the valley itself seemed to speak. A hum, 2 frequencies woven like breath and heartbeat, filled the air. Birds paused mid-call, leaves stilled. The hikers froze, unsure whether they'd awakened a machine or a memory. One whispered, "It's alive." The sound pulsed, syncing with wind gusts, rising until thunder accompanied it in perfect tempo. Above, clouds gathered without rain, performing reverence. The hikers dropped the recorder and fled, but the valley continued singing long after they were gone. From that day, the forest developed a rhythm of weather impossible to predict, yet soothingly familiar. Rain always fell in pairs, 2 drops landing together, then a pause. The planet, somewhere deep beneath, repeated its oldest mantra: coexistence, remembered through vibration, never lost to silence. Satellite scans later revealed heat signatures, forming curved lines where no roads existed. Analysts called it data noise, but the pattern resembled a map drawn by invisible hands, a loop encircling the ridge, splitting, rejoining, looping again. Scholars named it the cartography of ghosts. Mira's notes resurfaced, annotated in margins with coordinates that matched perfectly. When compared to migration paths, the overlay produced symmetry too precise for chance. Researchers debated natural causes, tectonic pressure, mineral warmth, but one ecologist smiled knowingly.
"The valley's still walking itself," she said. On night imagery, faint luminescent streaks flickered across the water, white gold trails sweeping like tails and claws. The phenomenon vanished by dawn, leaving only ripples shaped as interlocked circles. The map refused permanence, redrawn by every rainfall. Perhaps the ghosts weren't haunting, perhaps they were maintaining infrastructure, the geography of empathy etched into atmosphere, renewing itself each time compassion demanded cartography.
Meteorologists studying the region began calling it the Library of Weather. Storms behaved differently there, organized, rhythmic, never catastrophic. Rainfall measured in perfect duets, thunder arriving with musical precision. Instruments recorded barometric pressure fluctuations, matching a biological heartbeat. "The valley's climate has intelligence," a climatologist murmured. "It edits itself." They installed sensors, but half malfunctioned, returning recordings of deep tonal frequencies not attributed to wind or ground movement. One technician, sleepless, replayed a file in reverse and swore he heard breathing, slow, calm, and paired. Funding increased, explanations multiplied. Yet beyond metrics, locals simply said, "The forest remembers who saved whom." When storms passed, leaves glistened like script, each droplet reflecting paired silhouettes. Even the clouds seemed to obey punctuation, pausing between bursts as if reading aloud. Somewhere unseen, the old pact endured, not superstition, but weather's autobiography, written in rainfall, edited by mercy, archived under thunder's careful librarianship. Generations of animals thrived under this temperate sky. Bears taught cubs patience near rivers once feared. Bobcats approached currents without flinch, drinking side by side with creatures they once hunted. Evolution had absorbed cooperation as instinct. The ecosystem grew tranquil yet alert. Predators still predators, but governed by unspoken empathy. Researchers tagged new species showing behavioral anomalies, shared dens during storms, food caches left intentionally unguarded. The world beyond called it anomaly, the valley called it memory. On a spring morning, a cub followed paw prints leading to the ridge, pausing beside smaller prints newly pressed beside its own. The camera trap captured the moment, past and present, overlapping like verses repeating a refrain. Even silence changed timbre. It sounded communal. Every generation inherited something unnamed but unmistakable. The reflex to pause before harm, to see another heartbeat and hesitate. That hesitation, multiplied across lifetimes, became evolution's gentlest rebellion. In a remote archive, Mira's audio logs were discovered decades later. Young scholars digitized them, their headphones filling with low pulses that felt more medicinal than mechanical. "It's calming," one whispered. Her final entry contained coordinates and a single phrase: "All floods become songs if you listen long enough." Inspired, a global initiative formed to map emotional intelligence in ecosystems, rainforest empathy, coral cooperation, avian grief. The valley became pilgrimage ground for scientists and poets alike. Visitors left offerings, feathers, riverstones, handwritten apologies. The old ranger's cabin was rebuilt as a sanctuary for observation, not extraction. On its wall hung a simple quote carved into cedar: "Compassion leaves footprints deeper than fear." Each storm season, volunteers gathered on the ridge, listening to the duet hidden under wind. They didn't measure it, they harmonized with it, understanding finally that data was only another way to pray. Composers sampled valley recordings, weaving them into symphonies. Concert halls filled with thunder shaped into lullaby, wind layered over pulse, river merged with breath.
Audiences wept without knowing why, their bodies responding to frequencies evolution hadn't forgotten. "You're hearing ancestry," a conductor explained, "compassion encoded in vibration." The finale ended always the same, two low notes resonating in perfect interval, fading into silence that wasn't empty, but full. Outside, rain mirrored the rhythm on city windows, pairing drops unconsciously. Critics wrote of the music as haunting. Believers called it resurrection. The valley, meanwhile, continued unbothered, composing endlessly through leaves and water. Somewhere beneath its roots, two heartbeats, one heavy, one light, kept time for the planet's quiet orchestra. The flood had not taken, it had tuned. Every storm since simply repeated the theme. Survival, when sung together, is indistinguishable from love's first utterance.
On clear nights, astronomers noticed a subtle anomaly above the valley. Twin constellations flickering with synchronous brightness, visible only when lightning pulsed below. They called it atmospheric reflection, but folklore insisted otherwise. Locals named them the Companions. Through telescopes, the twin lights shimmered, one golden, one pale silver, orbiting imperceptibly closer each year. Mira's journal predicted it decades earlier. The sky will mirror the ground once the forest learns to forgive. Now, stargazers witnessed prophecy converting to pattern. Parents told children that the stars were guardians watching the rivers, ensuring floods never forgot mercy. In the hush before dawn, the lights dimmed together, returning with the first thunder. Cosmic empathy had joined the ecosystem's registry, heaven synchronized with Earth. Somewhere between cloud and constellation, the same rhythm persisted, unseen paws walking across eternity's field, leaving trails of luminescence shaped exactly like intertwined prints. Decades rolled into centuries, the valley aged with dignity. Rain arrived each season, but never in violence. Scientists theorized geological stabilization. Elders said the valley had made peace with itself. The river's current stayed faithful, its water clear enough to reveal smooth stones carved like ancient runes. Those who waded in swore they felt pulses underfoot, faint, comforting, like being measured by kindness. Children played where tragedy once reigned, their laughter blending with distant thunder, rehearsing restraint. The flood that once divided species had rewritten physics itself. Chaos converted to compassion, entropy disciplined into rhythm. The valley became a classroom for the planet, proof that trauma, properly remembered, reforms. No monument marked the miracle, only equilibrium. And if sometimes at dusk, two ripples crossed without wind's help, no one disturbed them. Legends, after all, need room to breathe. The valley simply exhaled, content to remember softly.
Across oceans, seismic monitors detected faint rhythmic tremors synced precisely with the valley's storms. Not destructive, protective. Planetary coherence spreading like empathy through tectonic nerves. Earth's pulse, a physicist called it, not coincidence, communication. The rhythm matched Mira's recordings, unchanged for centuries. Animals elsewhere began mirroring valley behaviors, dolphins guiding whales, predators sparing prey during tempests. Humanity, too, started listening differently, designing cities with water corridors, allowing nature to breathe. Empathy had infected architecture. Somewhere between faith and geology, the planet found tempo. The flood's echo had expanded until every coastline hummed the same lullaby of coexistence. Satellites measured harmony, poets translated it into prayer. For the first time, the world vibrated in agreement. A chorus built from disaster's remains. Beneath continents and wars and noise, the pulse endured, constant, persuasive, a reminder that survival's highest form isn't victory, it's synchronization. Centuries later, the valley rests unchanged, lush and listening. Lightning still sketches its delicate cursive above, but rain now falls like applause after the final symphony note. No monuments, no plaques, only rhythm. Travelers who camp near the river report dreams of fur brushing their palms, of eyes bright as dawn guiding them through floodlight memories. When they wake, footprints circle their tents, one large, one small, imprinted in dew, gone by sunrise. The world calls them legends. The forest calls them rehearsal. Dawn stretches across the horizon, gold bleeding into blue, and for a breath, the entire valley hums, two tones, ancient and inseparable. The silence that follows is not emptiness, but completion, the long exhale after compassion's crescendo. Somewhere unseen, two spirits walk the water's edge, guardians of mercy. The story ends where it began, with survival transformed into love, and love refined into rhythm everlasting.